When people think about Napoleon Bonaparte, they usually picture a short, angry man with his hand tucked inside his coat, surrounded by maps and cannons. They see him as a conqueror, a warmonger, or a madman who marched armies into Russia for the sake of his ego. But that image is a caricature. And caricatures are dangerous because they make us underestimate stories we should examine very carefully. Napoleon did not only fight wars. He reshaped the world order of his era. He challenged kings, humiliated emperors, rewrote laws, and dragged feudal Europe, unwillingly, toward the modern age. Then he lost everything. Not because of bad luck, not because of the weather, but because he fell into the oldest trap in the history of power. He began to believe he was above the very rules that had made him great. This is his story, and it is far more relevant today than most people think. First, we need to look at where he came from, because beginnings matter. Napoleon Bonaparte was born in Corsica in 1769, not in France but in Corsica. The island had been sold to France by the Republic of Genoa only 1 year before his birth. Technically, he was almost considered Italian. His real name was Napoleone di Bonaparte. Corsican and Italian were spoken at home. When he arrived at a French military academy at the age of 9, he could barely speak the language of the country he would one day rule. People mocked his accent. He was looked down upon because of his poverty. His family had a minor noble status, but it was not enough to earn respect. From the very beginning, he was an outsider, and that feeling of exclusion never left him. It became the driving force behind everything he did. At the military academy, he excelled in mathematics and artillery. He graduated at the age of 16 and joined the French army as a second lieutenant. He had no money, no connections, and no bright future ahead of him. At that time in France, advancement depended on the family you were born into. If you were not born into the right family, your limits were already set. Then, in 1789, the French Revolution erupted, and that ceiling disappeared. The aristocracy that had blocked his path was dismantled. The royal order that stood above him was destroyed. One of the most rigid armies in Europe suddenly opened itself to talent, and Napoleon possessed talent at a level that frightened people. He read extensively about military history, mathematics, philosophy, and geography. He slept only 4 hours a night. He could hold complex situations in his mind and make decisions faster than his opponents could react. His first major breakthrough came during the siege of Toulon in 1793. He identified the critical artillery position in the port city that had allied itself with the British, personally led the assault, and captured the city. Overnight, he rose from being an unknown officer to becoming a brigadier general. The right people had started to notice him. In 1796, he was given command of the French army in Italy. But this army existed in name only, exhausted, unpaid, and demoralized. His first speech to the soldiers set the tone for everything that would follow. He told them that beyond the Alps lay fertile lands, wealthy cities, and glory. He did not promise safety. He promised greatness. And the soldiers followed him. Within a few months, he crushed Austrian and Piedmontese forces, forced treaties upon them, and reshaped northern Italy. Europe's great powers had begun to take him seriously. In 1798, he launched the Egyptian campaign. This expedition was important not only militarily but also culturally, because he brought 150 scientists, artists, and researchers with him. The Rosetta Stone was discovered and the Nile was mapped. Napoleon was not merely conquering territory. He was constructing himself as a carrier of Enlightenment civilization. By 1799, France was in political chaos. There were coups, corruption, and economic crisis. Napoleon returned from Egypt, carried out his own coup, and within a few weeks became the first consul of France. He was 30 years old and the de facto dictator of a country with 30 million people. And here is the point that surprises most people. He was not only a military genius, he was also extraordinary in governance. The Napoleonic Code, completed in 1804, standardized French law, abolished feudal privileges, guaranteed freedom of religion, and declared that all male citizens were equal before the law, regardless of birth. This system still forms the basis of legal systems in France, Quebec, Louisiana, much of Latin America, and many parts of the Middle East today. Then came the coronation ceremony in 1804. Pope Pius VII traveled all the way from Rome to Paris. But when the crown was about to be placed on Napoleon's head, Napoleon took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head. The message was crystal clear. I answer to no one. By 1810, the empire was at its peak. His brothers sat on the thrones of Spain, Holland, and Westphalia. Much of Europe was under his influence. The only power that firmly stood against him was Britain, protected by its naval superiority. And this is where the story began to turn in the opposite direction, because the same qualities that had carried him to the top were now beginning to destroy him. In 1808, he removed the King of Spain and replaced him with his brother Joseph. On paper, it looked logical, but the result was disastrous. The Spanish launched a brutal guerrilla war. The French army became trapped there for years. Napoleon called it his Spanish ulcer, because it slowly weakened the empire. Then came Russia. In 1812, he marched into Russia with one of the largest armies Europe had ever seen, around 680,000 soldiers. The Russians retreated, burning villages and supplies behind them. When Napoleon entered Moscow, the city was empty and in flames. He waited for the Tsar to surrender, but things did not go as he expected. When the retreat began, the Russian winter destroyed the army. Fewer than 100,000 of the 680,000 soldiers who entered Russia managed to return. Hunger, cold, disease, and Cossack attacks brought the army to its end. This was not merely a defeat, it was total annihilation. After this, the European powers united. Prussia, Austria, Russia, and Britain formed a coalition. Napoleon was defeated at Leipzig in 1813. He abdicated the throne and was exiled to the island of Elba. He escaped, but he returned. Even the soldiers sent to arrest him joined his side. He ruled again for the 100 Days. Then in 1815 he was defeated for the last time at the Battle of Waterloo and sent to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. He died there in 1821. The cause of his death is still debated. Stomach cancer, arsenic poisoning, or some other reason remains unknown. So how should we judge Napoleon? How do we evaluate a man who spread Enlightenment laws across Europe by force, while simultaneously restoring slavery in French colonies? A man who wrote laws of equality while silencing the press? The honest answer is this: he was neither entirely a hero nor entirely evil. He was a far more complex and instructive figure. He proved that talent and ambition, without external restraint, eventually destroy themselves. The speed, courage, and refusal to accept limits that made him great turned into fatal weaknesses when patience and restraint became necessary. He also showed how history can be rewritten. The story that Napoleon was short is actually a lie. He was of average height for a Frenchman of his era. This myth was created by British wartime propaganda and spread for 2 centuries. History is always shaped according to the interest of those who tell it. The real Napoleon is far more impressive and far more disturbing than the cartoon version. He began as a foreign child who spoke French with an accent, and in less than 15 years built the greatest European empire since Rome. And in the end he lost everything because of overconfidence, exhaustion, and the loneliness that power brings. Empires do not collapse only because of external pressure. They collapse when the center that built them loses its judgment. Rome's monetary system collapsed because of over-exploitation. Napoleon's empire collapsed because it expanded beyond what was sustainable. The mechanism was different, but the pattern was the same. The lesson is this: greatness without limits, without humility, without accountability, and without the willingness to listen to bad news, is always temporary. Napoleon understood everything about war and governance except the one thing that mattered most: when to stop.